So I think, like, as well as having kind of the patience, or a part of having the patience, obviously you said it was easy having somebody with Dan's track record, um, saying that they believed in you. But I think as well, from an outsider looking at it at that time, I think like having you spoke about enjoying the process, and the fact that that process was that much more enjoyable probably made that, or did it make it, or do you feel like it made it easier to kind of like stick with that as well, kind of when you're you're jumping 7:30 in Bedford, for example?
Yeah, big time. As I say, like so many people had looked in on as the things that I've been doing previously and going, no, you don't train hard enough, you're not doing the right things, etc., etc. But I knew it worked for me, and as I say that having that reinforced by somebody like Dan made it easier. And I enjoyed it. Now the work was very, very hard. I still remember famously the entire British team going out to South Africa on a training camp. And Dan, I'm trying to think if that was 2010 or 2011, whichever year it was, but it might have been 2011. And Dan basically got the entirety of the British team to come and do the warm up with us because I think there'd been a lot of people going like, oh, what the stuff they do is no good. It's like very, very British approach to anything different to what they do, sadly. And we took pretty much everybody who was out on that camp through the warm up that we used to do, an A warm up, as it was known. And anybody that knows any of Dan's stuff will know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And after, I reckon, 2/3 of it, maybe 3/4, and there was no other athlete bar our group still managing to complete the drills because everybody was just absolutely ripped to bits. And that was one of the most impressive things about the way that Dan coached and trained us. You were working hard and you're developing and building in a way. And obviously, he didn't just throw straight into that for the first day and then that was it, expected to not find it difficult. But the things we were doing was developing our bodies in such a way that you felt strong. So we'd be doing these drills, and I would know that from the first time I'd ever done them, they were quite difficult. But to then see others trying to do them after I'd had a year of doing them or so, 18 months, and seeing how much they struggled, it just reinforced that we were working hard and doing the right stuff. And it was enjoyable. As I said, like that was a big thing. I got introduced to weights on a whole other level, for example, with Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
famously, me and you would do bits and bobs. You're the first person to ever teach me how to do a power clean, for example.
Yeah,
And I'm trying to think,
I recall
what
that.
what year was
That would have been 2008, I think. But I remember sort of like, okay, we'll start with the bar, and then like, okay, all right, that looks pretty good. All right, let's just put 40 kilos on. All right, that looks quite easy. All right, let's go 60 kilos. All right, quite easy. And this is day one. And I think you cleaned 110 on day one. I think you cleaned 110 kilos that day. I remember it quite well. I remember it vividly. It definitely was 110 kilos.
but
Yeah,
and that was an interesting thing, obviously. So that's 2008.
I'm 90% sure that was 2008. Yeah.
I turned professional at the back end of, well, maybe the summer of 2005. Really, that's when I've made that decision. That's what was happening.
Yeah.
And I think maybe shows a level of disjoint between sort of physical, the understanding of how the physical body can react to certain training and how you can develop a body to get better and things. Not saying that you just go out there and lift loads of weights and that's how you get stronger.
Yeah.
But what I learned under Dan was that that's just an important tool to have to develop things like tendon strength and actually, again, move your body in certain ways with resistance to help you do what you go out there and do, and building, I guess, a level of resilience, if you like, because of it, because my body could take maybe a bit more load. Obviously, I was a bit older when I joined Dan as well.
Yeah.
But all of these things, fundamentally, there was a reason to why we did it.
Yeah.
And that was maybe something that I'd never really experienced before as well, of actually having a training program, which was given to me. Dan gives out a training program every 3 weeks. You know that the basics of that training program are going to be a full week, then an easier week. That's how we trained it. So you would do pretty much every session on those 2 weeks, obviously body permitting. On that third week, you would drop your Saturday session, so you'd have a full weekend off. And then I think, if I remember correctly, with me, we pretty much, after a while, we ended up getting down to like 3 sessions, really, a Monday, Tuesday, Friday. The rest of it, there's like recovery stuff you're doing. You're not just doing nothing on the other days. But that was how. So first of all, I knew that's roughly what happened. Now, within the first 2 key weeks, things are obviously changing sort of program on program, but it was amazing to be able to now look at a piece of paper as it was and download it, and you put it in a folder. I've got one of the folders that I think it might actually just be over in the bookcase over there. And you would have your training on it. I know we've shared some of the training many times over the years and talked about it. And as well, for the mindset of getting ready for training, I would wake up in the morning knowing what I was going to put my body through. And that is such a useful thing, because what I probably had experienced for a large part of my career until then was that you turn up to the track and the thought process was, okay, right, we're going to do, and it was just grab something and throw it at you.
Yeah.
And now I'm not saying that the coach themselves hadn't had any form of prior planning at all, but I think probably what was going on there was lots of different things, which was the variables, and it was a lot. And then depending on what's going on, all right, I fancy that one, we'll do that, irrespective of maybe things that have gone to pass before. And I famously remember coming back from a really bad hamstring tear and a surgery, actually, not on my hamstring, but on my ankle, and then being thrown into a session that I passed out from. I had to go to hospital because I had basically my body shut off for a bit. And I think that side of things is incredibly problematic and happens not just in the UK, it happens all over the world. So for me, having it written out and something that I could quantify, and within that, bear in mind there's variance. And again, if anybody looks at Dan's training program, it might be 3 to 5 times something or something. Now, the genius of that as well is that you turn up to the track, your coach, Dan as it was in my case, looks at you, watches you warm up, talks to you, sees how you feel, how everything's going, puts into perspective what may have come to pass the days leading up, how you felt, etc., and will adapt that session within those parameters in order to still maximize your performance. And one of the maybe the most eye-opening things for me was sometimes driving down to Lee Valley to walk in. Dan would literally watch me walk in through the doors over in the corner to walk down to the track. He'd be like, just do me a lap quickly. And I just sort of ran round and go, we're not doing anything today. You're just going to go see, as it was, Jerry Ramagiti, my chiro physio, who was, again, another hugely important person in my career. But it was having that ability as well. And again, that confidence within their own programming and everything else to say, you do not look right, or you're not moving correctly today. Your body is either stiff here or whatever else. Dan has got a remarkable eye for that. But to say, we don't need it, because it's going to now be counterproductive if I now push you through the session. You may pick up an injury, something else might happen, you might get some form of prolonged fatigue, which then affects other things. So that as well, knowing all of that and understanding that the coach fully believes in you, the program, and where you can take that, means that, again, jumping 7:30 because you're having a bad day, but you're trying to get your head around certain things, isn't a problem, because you do believe, and I think intrinsically I always knew that at some point I would have some level of success. I had that belief in my system, and it took having the right structure around me for me to be able to show it, really.
Yeah. And I think at the risk of sort of putting words into your mouth as well, kind of not just knowing what you are going to do on the day-to-day, because the training is written out. I can imagine that kind of gives you a sense of confidence in terms of, okay, well, there's a reason. That it just gives the implication that if I see training that's written out for a 3-week block, as opposed to turning up to the track and the coach said, well, we're just going to do this tonight, or we're going to do this tonight, then the former, seeing a 3-week block written out, it just gives the perception there's more thought that's gone into it. And so therefore I think it's easier to potentially have that kind of like buy-in, and there's a rhyme or a reason as to why things are going to be the way they are.
And I think with something else that's so unbelievably important is asking why.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, and I say in my early career in particular, nobody ever explained to me why I was doing what I was doing. And if I asked, well, that's your session, get on with it.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I struggle to understand why an athlete asking a coach what the process is a problem. But
Yeah.
that generally is, you're seen as either you're either trying to go against them or you're trying to catch them out or whatever else. No, it's purely for, especially anybody like myself who's relatively inquisitive about the process of development. Asking why is one of the most important things again. And it sort of comes back to what was said before. A coach who is confident in what they're doing will have the answer.
Yeah.
They will be able to articulate back to you why they're doing it.
Or they're going to have the confidence to say, do you know what? That's a good question. I need to go away and think about that, and I'm going to come back to you as to why. And because I've said this to my athletes in the past, like one of two outcomes going to happen there is I'm going to come back to you. If I don't have the answer right away, I'm going to come back with a reason, or I'm going to go and evaluate. And if I can't think of a reason, I'm probably going to take it out.
Yeah, but that's having confidence again within yourself, and actually having the ability to go, okay, maybe actually I need to think about different processes and programming in order to make sure I know the ins and outs at all
it's
times.
Being able to evolve.
Of course, which is the most important thing in any walk of life.
Yeah.
But I think often, and sports like athletics, I guess, falls foul to it, as we said previously in this conversation, that there's maybe not the right investment or people that get involved with it, so it's harder to develop it. But when I was I literally at times said to Dan, like, why are we doing this? And he seemed to enjoy me asking, because then Dan could go off on one of his famous tangents about what it was. And I loved it. And it was such a nice feeling to ask him. And sometimes, I'll be honest, he lost me a little bit. If Dan was like really on form, he could get quite, and I'd just be like nodding at him, going a bit wide-eyed at that point. But as well as, and again, I think another important thing actually, and I don't want this just turning into like obviously me just because Dan's the greatest, Dan's the greatest, but it's just it's a good barometer for others to look at, just to get an overview of what I think works for somebody like myself. Anyway, having somebody that can talk to you in the most unbelievably scientific words, sentences, and whatever else, I think is great. But that person that can also water that down to somebody with the simple minds that I have, maybe, and you understand it, is important. Because the amount of times often you'd have coach and physio or coach and director or whatever else talking in a language that I would pick up bits and whatever else, but then relay that to me in layman terms. That's another hugely important thing. And I see it now in some of the younger coaches out there. They sort of go off on these bizarre tangents using words that often don't even make sense in the context of what they're trying to explain, to try and make themselves look maybe more intelligent or more important.
I think social media is a problem with this, because I think that's one of the ways you stand out on social media is using buzzwords and looking like the smartest person on the platform. And I think it's sort of, I think it creates that problem. Sorry, I cut you off, but yeah.
No, it's true. And again, a few times I've put that to Dan as well, because obviously Dan was my coach for a decade. So I mean, like, that's obviously the person that I speak to. And it is, and in his reply often, it's just that they're just trying to reinvent the wheel. And I see it, because I say these things come in, and really, I don't think they understand what's going on, and the athletes do it. And again, that's that confidence of the coach and the setup and everything else, which is then projected onto the athlete. If it's constantly, every single week, it's the new buzzword, new, I don't know, blocks technology, the new pulley system, the new wicket hurdle things, I don't know what they're called at the moment, whatever they're called at the moment. All of these things, if it's constantly that and it changes, and I see it, I watch 1 year, the training is all about this one thing. The next year, oh, no, we don't do that anymore. We do this now. I know that's rubbish. We're going to move back. That, for me, shows somebody that maybe doesn't have the confidence in what they're doing from the get-go. And that reflects onto the athletes, I think. And athletes aren't stupid. They start picking up on that. And if it's constantly, there's no structure there. Sometimes the simplest form of training is what gets the best out of people. I've always said it, like, if you're trying to coach speed, and I've witnessed it, you put fast people together, put the pressure on, put them on the line and make them run against each other. It makes them faster. They get faster. And of course, the right technical cues, et cetera, is important. But putting pressure on athletes for them to perform in large aspects of what they do, not just asking them to turn up to a national trials or a Diamond League event, or whatever level they might be, and say, right now, switch it on. You have to think about everything, but not try and give them absolutely everything. Find what works. And I say sometimes simplicity is the best way, in my opinion, and from what my experience is of watching groups, athletes and coaches. And you know what, talking to athletes as well, generally big time performing athletes love being pushed by others. I loved it. If I had another jump, I for a while jumped with Fabrice Lapierre and Mitchell Watt. Now, two guys that we'd had great battles over the years, great athletes in their careers, either Winde did or Legal, both jumped further than I did as well. And I loved it. And Mitch in particular, I haven't seen Fab in a long time, but Mitch is still to this day one of my really close friends. And we loved those battles. But we used to raise our game to it. The idea of us pushing each other in training and then in competition was a great thing. That's something that I think is missed a lot nowadays as well.
Yeah, I think that the fundamentals, the effective fundamentals of training probably don't change, right? So like the basis of your training program probably doesn't need to change very much from year to year, because the basics are the basics. And I think, I believe I've heard Dan call it in an interview, refer to his own training. I think the word that he used was vanilla. And I think it's quite interesting. Like, I mean, in my experience of Dan, is that when I listen to him explain what he's doing to other coaches, then he probably goes off with the scientific jargon like you were referring to there. And then obviously I've seen him working with you, and then I'm thinking, Jesus, even Greg could understand that. And it's just, but like, jokes aside, like it's very simple. Like what he does is very simple, and then the cues that he uses and the language that he uses with the athletes is very simple. And I think that I completely agree with you. I think that's hugely important.
And I guess on that as well, just adding to it and thinking of like that side of things evolving. Like Dan would film a lot of stuff as well, and I'm quite a visual guy, so I like watching things back, because often, again, a coach will tell you to do certain things, and you think, am I doing it, whatever else, and they're just sort of barking orders. Again, some of the things I've heard shouted at tracks before is just mind-boggling. Right. But to then watch it back and to see that, I think, is also another hugely important thing. At times you just see Dan holding an iPad, just sort of watch it go past. And I get real fond memories of it, but then he calls you over, you go through it, and he's like, see, you've hit it here, you've missed it here, whatever. And then you go, okay, now I can visualize it. I can see myself doing it. And then you can stick, as it goes in here, you rehearse it as many times as possibly can, and then you feel it. And then that feeling that you might have had that you've never seen before, you can now marry the two together.
Yeah. Okay.
And then it helps develop. And so I say that those sorts of things, simplicity, but also with the technical side of something like a video, is brilliant. But you're right. But Dan, again, famously always say, look, I've done this for 40 years or whatever it is. I've developed something that works. And that's that belief system. And that's taking time to understand and figure out what does work.
So speaking about what works and the process, are you able to outline, we're going back a while now, are you able to outline what a typical week of training might have looked like for you? Obviously, I know it's going to vary depending on time of year and different factors, but is there kind of like a skeleton of what like a typical week of training would have looked like for you?
First of all, thank you for reminding me that it was a long time ago. To be honest, though, my body right now reminds me it was a long time ago, because doing very mundane things it's a lot more than it used to. I think it's simple, but it's not simple as well, as you say, because there's variance within it. But generally, for me, we'd have some form of adaptive speed session on a Monday. So if we were breaking this down, so it would be depending on where we were, things, it could be like a 30s, 40s, 50s, or you could sometimes go in the winter a little bit longer, 50s, 60s, 70s, or something like that. And you might be doing, again, 3 times 3, 3 times 5, something like that. So you'd have like a speed-based workout, but it would be like 80% or so, just to sort of build it up. And then we'd lift. We'd lift in the afternoon after the track session. And it was always track first, lift second. I never lifted and then ran.
Yeah.
That was something I never did. So that was sort of Monday in that way. Tuesday was then tech. So jumping tech as it was for me. So I'd be in the pit. Now, when I was younger with Dan, we could sometimes sneak in 2 jump sessions a week. But the one thing that anybody that ever followed my career would know is that I broke quite a lot. So we had to be quite careful. But it is amazing when I now think back to probably those years of 10 into 11 leading towards 12, me and my training partner at the time, Steve Lewis, he'd be over on the pole vault bed on one side. I would then be in this inside at Lee Valley. I'd be on the long jump pit, of course. And I might get 30 jumps in, which to me now is mind-blowing, because probably from 2014 onwards, so that was a real short amount of time my body seemed to have that capacity, I'd be cutting it down to maybe 8 to 15 at most jumps in session, and as time went on it got even less than that. So we've gone sprinting on a Monday, jumping on a Tuesday, Wednesday speed again, and now this would be faster, and this would normally, I mean, all of it would be in spikes, obviously, if you're heading towards the summer, but generally that would be a faster session week. Thursday for me then became a rest day, full rest day. Friday we would do, Wednesday as well, we'd lift again, so we've done speed and lifting. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday were lifting days for me. So Thursday off, got to Friday, and that would, if we could get it in, because say Thursday nearly always became a rest day, we would sometimes jump on a Friday if it was doable, but generally I would be doing some form of running. Now, bear in mind on these sessions as well, we might have the multiple jump series, or we might have shot throws, which are added on these as well. And they're programming that they would feature, but they might move depending on what Dan has set for everything. So all of these ancillary things that you would have, I say overhead back, one of my favorite things to do of all time, and probably the one thing that, as stories, that's probably one of my most impressive things that I could do.
Didn't you go further than Donovan Bailey?
Yeah, I flew further than any of Dan's athletes has ever had. And I'd ever seen. And my overhead back with the 4 was 28-ish meters, around that. So way over the throwing sector in the whole way. And that was something that I loved doing, so I was good at it. Multiple jump, which is known as rip. So your left, right, you're standing, or all these things were also added in there, but they would move around. And then on a Saturday would then be the longer runs, and longer runs for a long jumper is a maximum of a 120. And that, again, that was really interesting learning that with Dan, because obviously I rarely ran hundreds, but I'd run them ever so often. 120s is all you need. A guy that ran 45 meters and jumped into a sandpit running 120s, and we'd rep them, of course, as well, and they'd get fast. And I've got such fond memories of holding camps in California in particular, few in Phoenix because I was based there quite a long time, but the holding camps that we had would have been with the other British athletes. When I was based in Phoenix, I was based there for 4 years pretty much, for long stints. But the previous ones that were in California, I'd be running against sprinters and other athletes and everything else. And I used to absolutely love running 120s because I could generally beat most people at them. And there was something about that every Saturday I knew it would be between a 90 and a 120. I'm trying to I feel like I might have done a couple of 150s with Dan, but my memory is generally only up to 120. And then Sunday off again. So Thursday, Sunday, always off. So I had 5 sessions a week. Now, of course, on some of them are double days with the lifting. And that would be the crux of the training. You're working towards building and developing your body within those sessions and those days. And we knew, for me, recovery was a hugely important part. That's what stopped me getting so hurt. So Thursday, say Sunday, 100% off. Sometimes there'd be another day in there. And on the 3rd week of the cycle, Saturday was also off. Now, in the summer, interestingly, Dan has a thing called the 3-day rollover, which, again, is a sort of genius way of working. with athletes that are bouncing around the world competing. So there's 3 key sessions, which are made up pretty much of the 5-day week that I'd said previously. Of course, you're not doing your 120s and stuff at that time of the year, really, unless you've got some time off. So that Saturday session is basically always dropped. But you're trying to fit in a key jump session, as I would, a key speed session, so sort of really motoring around 50 meters or so, which was one I thoroughly enjoyed as well. Lifting, normally I lift heavy once a week, and sorry to mention on that previous program, of those 3 lifting days, one would be a heavy lifting day at max. The other 2 would sit around 80-85%, and see on Dan's place it was at 80 to 85%. They're the days that you go to 80 to 85% of what your max out day would be. So you're not constantly destroying your body in that way. So the 3-day rollover, and that's something again I would say to athletes getting ready in the summer, is not panicking and thinking that I'm not training as hard as I was before. Oh no, this is now going to cause me problems. It's being confident within what you've done previously and now getting those key sessions in and recovering, because what people always completely forget is that the mental and physical neural pressure that you put through your body every time you compete, because when you compete, you're max out. You're putting all of that hard work together in order to try and perform at the highest level. Sometimes you're having a bad day, you're having to fight wind, rain, whatever you're doing, went to competition, sometimes you feel ill. There's all these things going on. So having those key sessions each week leading up to that competition, or on the week that's then a rest week between them, means that you're staying in touch with the training, but also getting in what you need. And that's how Dan's training with various, say, from the winter stuff, you're doing longer, sort of up backs was a particular favourite of mine, running down, turning straight back, all these sorts of things. But predominantly speed, lift, jump, speed, lift, rest, speed, lift, not quite as intense, longer runs, rest.